Hamilton, the monumental, once-in-a-lifetime Broadway hit which fused the history of the United States along with the vision of the class which it was built upon. Now, I know there's been already so much said on the 10-year ride of this amazing musical piece, but ever since I saw it back when it first appeared on streaming services, and eventually in August of last year at the Victoria Palace Theatre, I knew that I had to give my own 2 cents on it and tell my own perspective. Today, we will be exploring Hamilton and its perpetuation and portrayal of the American dream and why it almost always ends in tragedy. Hamilton is a musical and theatrical piece about American Treasury Secretary and Founding Father Alexander Hamilton and his rise from an immigrant stepping off the boat to an established and venerated figure within the history of the United States of America. I think no matter what anyone says or thinks, the reputation of the man himself before the musical was never as inflated or as looked into as it is now. And I think that's another thing that should be celebrated about pieces like Hamilton. History is dismissed as the past, and only we suffer from perpetrating that narrative further. Yes, you can say it's a play about rapping slave masters, and factually, you would be correct, but it's so much more than that at its core. Hamilton, and obviously the mastermind behind it, Lin Manuel Miranda, did what I think really no other piece of media or pop culture has attempted to do, to rewrite history, but not in the Orwellian 1984 way, but in a way that would drive people to learn more and more about history and to learn from the mistakes of those that came before us. But before I tell you how, we must first look at the story of Hamilton and how from just a simple theatrical biopic based off a book, Lin Manuel Miranda crafted a timeless piece of pop culture, music, and theater. Hamilton presents Alexander Hamilton's life in 2 acts, each incumbent of 23 tracks, totaling up to roughly 2 hours and 40 minutes of runtime. The first focusing on his fierce rise to the top echelons of American society and government. Alexander Hamilton is the opening act of the musical. It starts by highlighting his rough upbringing in a single-parent household, his father abandoning Alexander and his mother at a young age, but even his mother eventually passing away from a severe illness, leaving him to fend for himself, studying, working, and hustling as hard as he could in search of a better life. The young Hamilton concludes that better life can be pursued in the then 13 colonies that were still under British control. So, in seeking his fulfillment of the American dream, he scrounged up every single penny and quarter he had and jumped on a ship to a new land, New York, the land of opportunity. This track obviously also acts as a strong catalyst and point of recurrence for the rest of the musical. Many, if not most of the motifs, philosophical and political themes and overall dynamics of the musical are traced right back here. As much as I would like to talk about each song in particular and how great it is, for the sake of not making this video 10 hours long, I'm gonna speak on the tracks and moving pieces of it that fit most importantly into my own vision of the musical and the vision of Hamilton itself. I think this far in, it's important to mention the vision of Lin Manuel Miranda himself. He was, after all, deeply inspired by the figure of Alexander Hamilton, being able to relate to him and seeing a lot of his father in him. In interviews, Miranda has mentioned that reading Ron Chernow's biography of Hamilton reminded him of his father's own tireless work ethic. Luis, a Puerto Rican immigrant who moved to New York at 18, built a career in politics and advocacy, often juggling multiple jobs to keep his head above water. This relentless pursuit of goals resonated with Miranda as he developed the character of Hamilton. It's now 1776, the year of the Revolution, and in the second track, Aaron Burr, Sir, Hamilton meets Aaron Burr, who is undoubtedly the second most important character in this story, because, spoiler alert, Gaiman's Hamilton. But it's not exactly a surprise, since we're told from the ending of the very first track that it's gonna happen. Anyways, after Burr gives Hamilton the most politician bogus advice of talk less, smile more, in the third track, My Shot, they step into a tavern where they meet the next 3 characters that are centerpieces to our story. Lafayette, a revolutionary Frenchman, Hercules Mulligan, an Irish-American tailor turned spy to help the US in the Revolutionary War, and John Lawrence would become a soldier and statesman who fought for the emancipation of African Americans. Since these guys all possess revolutionary fervor, Hamilton hits it off with them incredibly well. But from the very first interaction of Burr and Hamilton, it becomes clear that their dynamic and conflict is one of action versus inaction. Hamilton acts, pursues his goals unapologetically. Burr doesn't. He waits for opportunity to fall into his lap in order to actually do something. Hamilton has strong, grounded beliefs coupled with an infallible drive. Burr goes wherever the wind will take him in order to not fall out of favor with anyone. Hamilton would die to achieve their dream of revolution. Burr plays it safe and hangs back. And I think this is exactly what the American dream is incumbent of. This very dynamic between these two. But what is the American dream? Well, at its core, the American dream promises that any individual, regardless of birth or background, can achieve success through determination and effort. But this dream contains inherent contradictions between ambition and caution, risk and safety, speech and silence, idealism and pragmatism. Hamilton and Burr embodied those contradictions not as enemies, but as opposing forces necessary to define the whole. The American dream is like a coin, and these two represent the sides of it. Hamilton's side is the one preferable to the pursuit of the American dream, a relentless forward motion of pursuing goals and dreams. Hamilton writes, speaks, fights, builds. He's driven by insecurity, but also vision and legacy. This side believes that the American dream must be seized, forged, and even invented from nothing. He sees it as a proving ground, where action is the only currency of success. Hamilton represents it, whether through the Federalist Papers, founding the US financial system, fighting to create a constitution, establishing the first American bank, or his service in the war and the rest of his legacy. He really stands as one of, if not the earliest figures of the American dream and spirit, declaring at the core of its philosophy, if you stand for nothing, what'll you fall for? On the other side of the coin, you have Aaron Burr, who represents the other side of the coin, with the same interests in mind, but with a completely different approach, characterized by caution and windows of opportunity. He sees to it that it must be navigated carefully, quietly, with the long game in mind. He sees ambition as a private matter, not a public crusade like Hamilton. But this is exactly what damages his reputation, or rather his lack thereof, an actual reputation. While it may help with political adaptability and awareness of timing and power dynamics, it lacks ideological conviction. It suffers from chronic hesitation and a constant need to wait for it, which is Burr's most prominent motif, ironically. Burr is the realist survivor of the American dream, one who plays within the system, hoping silence will grant him flexibility, but ends up erased from history by indecision and lack of conviction. Even Hamilton's fast flow versus Burr's measured cadence in singing reflects their worldviews: speed versus caution, fire versus ice. In The Schuyler Sisters, we're introduced to Angelica, Eliza, and Peggy Schuyler, daughters of a wealthy New York family, walking through the city at the dawn of the American Revolution. Angelica declares that they're looking for a mind at work, while the song mixes flirtation, feminism, and a fresh perspective on the revolutionary spirit. The fact that history and revolution aren't just shaped by muskets and manifestos, but it's Hamilton's way of saying you can't tell the story of a nation without the women who shape it, emotionally, ideologically, and historically. I think it also highlights another very important theme of Hamilton: emancipation. Not just that all men are created equally, as Thomas Jefferson writes, but that every human being is. Anyways, we later have a ball where Eliza Schuyler and Hamilton meet and begin a relationship, which becomes more important later on. And we have a couple of tracks where the American Revolutionary War is presented. You'll Be Right, Right Hand Man, Stay Alive, where Lin manages to portray figures like George Washington, King George III, and other as theatrical historical characters, but with real substance and depth. The Ten Dual Commandments, however, is a play on Biggie's song, and many other tracks draw inspiration from all corners of hip-hop and music in general, showing us the reach and versatility that the musical has. Moving on, in Guns and Ships and Yorktown, we fast forward towards the end of the Revolutionary War. Hamilton and Washington being held by our favorite French immigrant, Lafayette, who managed to secure support from France to the colonies in order to defeat the British at Yorktown and other strategic points along the 13 colonies. And this is where we have to touch on a monumental point of the musical. I think the second biggest theme of the musical, from when Lin Manuel Miranda debuted it at the White House in front of Obama, and now, is the one of immigrants. This is a theme which is really what Lin's artistic vision is heavily built around. The fact, not the opinion, but the fact that the United States of America was built and is still being built by immigrants. the Irish, Mexicans, Cubans, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, and so many more. As of 2024, the US Census Bureau reported that immigrants make up 40% of the total US population, meaning about 46 million people. And that is what's reported by the government only. About 50% are from Latin America, and despite only being 14% of the population, they make up almost 19% of the workforce. They also have a higher labor participation than native-born citizens, filling critical gaps in tech, medicine, agriculture, construction, caregiving, and the many other crucial sectors of the economy. 50% of farm workers, 30% of construction, 1 in 4 healthcare work, 25% of engineers. They are nearly twice as likely to start a business compared to a native-born citizen, and they pay taxes, income, sales, property, and payroll. They contribute hundreds of billions annually to Social Security and Medicare, often without even being eligible to receive full benefits. This country has, without a doubt, been built upon the backs of immigrants, whether you like it or not. And what things do they get in return?
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating...
And uneducated fools such as Charlie Kirk using the analogy of a football team to describe a nation. Well, this is exactly the populist and blatantly racist agenda that Lin Manuel Miranda and Hamilton fight against, not through virtue signaling or shouting matches, but through the history, customs, and traditions of their own country. And this is exactly what I think is the most beautiful and impressive thing about the entire musical. Whether we're talking about Hamilton, which tells the story of the American dream, or other pieces in Lin's repertoire, such as In the Heights, this is without a doubt the vision of the American dream, and represented in true and actual fashion, not as a greedy capitalist game of Monopoly, but as a metaphysical and personal journey founded on truth, joy, compassion, and liberty. I don't know when this video will be out, but I know that the Hamilton cast on June 8th at the Tony Awards are absolutely gonna make a big statement on the state of the United States right now. The second act of the musical revolves around Hamilton's career as a lawyer and politician, the Constitutional Convention and non-stop, and becoming Treasury Secretary in Washington's presidential term, to his conflict with Jefferson, which starts with What Did I Miss and the first cabinet battle. This is where Hamilton starts kind of slowing down, trampling in the muds, potholes, and puddles of bureaucracy, backdoor deals, and the overall opportunistic game of democracy. In turn, this is where Burr starts to flourish more, because of his political adaptability. The room where it happens, and wait for it, the dynamic between Hamilton and Burr begins to shift. Hamilton goes from action to inaction, and Burr goes from inaction to action. The song The Room Where It Happens dramatizes the compromise of 1790, a private dinner between Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison, where Hamilton secures support for his financial plan in exchange for moving the US Capitol. But the focus isn't on the deal itself, it's on Aaron Burr's exclusion from it. Burr, who narrates the song, is left out of this defining moment in American history, and the event becomes a catalyst for his transformation. This is the moment where Burr realizes that waiting patiently and staying neutral will never get him power. From here on out, Burr changes, becoming a competitor and opposing Hamilton more and more openly. After George Washington retires from politics and with no one there to take his side anymore, Hamilton has a few more scuffles with Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and the John Adams administration, eventually leading him to have a fallout in American politics, although still holding quite some reputation with the public. Hamilton's hard-earned reputation takes a devastating hit when he begins an affair with Maria Reynolds, whose husband extorts him in exchange for silence. Unfortunately, Jefferson, Madison, and Burr cover the scandal and confront him in the song We Know. Though Hamilton insists none of the hush money came from government funds, the threat of political ruin looms. To clear his name, he publishes the Reynolds pamphlet, confessing the affair in painful detail, destroying his public image and deeply hurting his wife, Eliza. Hamilton's decline continues when his son Philip dies in a duel defending his father's honor. Following Hamilton's advice to aim at the sky, a gesture of peace, Philip is shot and killed when his opponent fires directly at him. Grief-stricken, Hamilton steps back from politics, but he re-emerges during the election of 1800, when Jefferson and Burr tie with 73 electoral votes. The House of Representatives must decide the winner, but despite years of rivalry, Hamilton throws his support behind Jefferson, arguing Burr lacks principles. Enraged, Burr challenges him to a duel. At Weehawken, Hamilton again aims high, refusing to shoot, but Burr doesn't. He fires, fatally wounding Hamilton, who dies shortly after, marking a tragic end to a brilliant, turbulent life. Legacy. What is a legacy? It's planting seeds in a garden you never get to see. This line, spoken near the end of the show, is presented as Hamilton's philosophical maturing, but throughout the musical, legacy is a tormenting ideal. For Hamilton, it's not about peace or contentment. It's about permanence. He's not trying to build a happy life. He's trying to outlive his own mortality. This obsession with legacy explains almost every self-destructive decision he makes. His relentless writing, his inability to let go of political grudges, even his choice to publish the Reynolds pamphlet. He would rather destroy his reputation on his own terms than let someone else write his story for him. Hamilton seduces us with its energy. The fast-paced language, the rise from nothing narrative, the promise that anyone can write their way out. For me and many others, it is inspiring, but I also believe it can become intoxicating. But under that surface is a darker truth. The dream costs something, often almost everything. Hamilton gives up family, rest, stability. He loses his son, his marriage, his peace. He never stops, even when it's clear he should. And Burr, who chooses caution instead of ambition, ends up paying a similar price. His own obscurity, his own regret, drowning in it. What the musical ultimately suggests is that the American dream, when pursued to its extreme, devours the dreamer. You can chase greatness, but greatness doesn't guarantee fulfillment, and it doesn't guarantee you immortality in the eyes of history. In fact, it might guarantee the opposite. And yet, people still chase it. Why? Because, like Hamilton, we fear being forgotten. We fear that our lives might not mean anything if they're not remembered. In this way, Hamilton becomes a kind of modern Greek tragedy. It begins as an anthem to upward mobility, but by the end, a quiet, haunting meditation on what's left behind, not just by Hamilton, but by everyone who gives their life to a cause that might not love them back.